Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Tech Guys Who Invest podcast, where each week you learn how to invest wisely and safely. Today, we're talking all about title with Staci and Rick from Accurate Title.
Hey, guys, welcome to the show.
Hey, I was just going to say it's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on and talk through a topic that I think people are aware of. They hear the words, but they don't always really fully understand it. So it's really interesting. It's going to be a great show. And I'd like to kick it off with just talking about what is title. So in the context of real estate, can you talk a little bit about what a title is and what it means for an owner to hold title?
Sure, I can start off with that. So if we think about an ownership of an automobile, we talk about a car title, and we know what that is. It's a piece of paper that we can transfer to another person. We have it notarized that we transfer the vehicle, and then they can take that down to the DMV and have it recorded. Well, a land title is very similar in that a document is created. You don't really transfer the previous deed to the next person. You hang on to that one, but you create a new one, which basically transfers your interest to the next person in line, whomever buys the property from you. And that document gets taken down to the county courthouse where the records are kept. And those records will indicate ownership of property, any encumbrances such as mortgages or deeds of trust. Sometimes judgments records are filed in the county as well. But that ownership takes on different forms. The most basic is a fee simple ownership, meaning that I own the property. I have that car, it's my car, I can sell it. As opposed to a joint tenancy where perhaps you and your spouse own a car together, both of you would have to sign that title. It's the same thing with real estate. And it gets very micro down to a leasehold interest where someone holds and retains property, but maybe they give you the right to use it for a certain period of time. And then a life estate, which is becoming more and more prevalent across the United States. As the country gets older, people will use a life estate deed to transfer that property to their children, but then retain the right to use it for the rest of their lives. So that's something we have to be very careful about when we do our search and records. So that's title.
I think something too about title that's interesting is it kind of seems cut and dry, but it can get very messy too. So especially when we'll talk about this a little bit down the line is going through our title searches and finding out some of the ways that the chain of title gets changed and transferred over. Title may seem very easy. Hey, you have, the ownership in this property, but sometimes it's more of a puzzle than that.
Awesome. Thank you for that explanation and that addition of what could happen and how crazy it seems title can be, which I want to ask about crazy title experiences or success or failure stories. We'll get to that in a little bit. Now, what types of investors should really care about knowing about title? Is it just, the buyer and seller, or are there any specific type of investors like single family or multifamily that should care?
Well, I would think, the flippant response would be anyone who cares about their investment should care about title. If they don't really care about their investment, then they don't need to worry about it. And to Staci's point, there are so many things that can go wrong that with a simple check of the records would provide the information they need. When we think about a title search, we're thinking about the ownership, who actually has the right to sell that property, to use that property. Then we think about the taxes. Are the taxes paid to the county or the municipality that the property's in? We also think about voluntary and involuntary liens. Voluntary liens are mortgages. Or a UCC, you get solar panels on your house. They put a UCC on it saying that for the next 5 years, basically they have rights to that property, that personal property of the solar panels, but they're attached to the house. And then involuntary liens, which are things like judgments. If someone's involved with a court case or something of that nature, and the judge decides that they owe money, then in that particular case, that's going to be a lien against the property. So all those things are kind of discovered during the title search. And, to get a title search done in a state like Florida, for instance, is probably about $50. Might be a little more, might be a little less, depending on the volume that you provide to the title company. If you maybe go to a state like Oklahoma is a great example where you have to get a title abstract, that might be $350. So if you're going to go through a bunch of investments and try to look for that right piece of property, and you're in Florida and maybe you do 10 of them and it's a $500 investment to get those 10 done and you find that perfect property, then that makes sense. Now, if you're in Oklahoma, where property values are probably going to be less and you have 10 properties, and then you're saying, well, wait a minute, do I really want to spend $3,500 to weed through these 10 properties? That might not be, the most ideal time to get a title search.
But I would say definitely that if you're looking to have any sort of interest in an actual property, title is always going to be worth it. There are situations where, like Rick said, you may think that you're going to be in first position, you're purchasing that note, you think everything's going to be good. And then here it found out that it was sold at a sheriff's tax sale, and you don't have any actual interest in the property. So, it just really depends on, how much are you purchasing in your pool, and is it worth potentially losing $15,000, $30,000 for? So I always recommend it, just because we have seen some horror stories. But yeah,
no,
I would say anyone with an interest.
One term that I think Rick mentioned was title abstract. Can you guys talk about what that is?
So a title abstract, title searching varies from state to state. So in some states, a searcher, a person who goes to the public records at the county courthouse, and now, particularly after COVID, counties have opened up their computer systems online and you can go in and take a look at the records yourself. And Florida is a great example of a state where they've opened up virtually the entire state, and you can look back decades and see all the records yourself. Now, you might not know what you're looking at, but at least you have access to it as a public person, as a lay person. In a state like Oklahoma, where I said it's an abstract, the person who goes to the courthouse and does that search isn't going to be very specific or focused about what they look at. What they're going to do is find anything that pertains to that piece of property and anything that pertains to any of the people who ever owned that property, and they're going to give you that abstract back. A typical title search may have 10, 15 pages of information. The first couple of pages will be a write-up of what was found. But after that, there could be a document like the deed for ownership, any open mortgages, deeds of trust, that sort of thing. Perhaps if there's, like I said, a UCC for solar panels, or if the person was involved in a court case. Yeah, something of that nature. So those things would be on that report, and you'd get copies of those documents. The abstract is going to be everything. So depending on the state, like Oklahoma, which says 60 years for an abstract, anyone who's owned that property in the last 60 years, you're going to see every deed transferred. You're going to see every mortgage transfer, actually deed of trust in Oklahoma. And then you're going to see any other documents that may have affected it. Those deeds of trust may have been satisfied, so you get those copies. So basically, it's rather than a digested version of the report, it is something that's given to you in mass, and then you have to weed through it to figure out. And that's why in Oklahoma, once again, it's so expensive, the state has determined that that person who goes to the courthouse can't make determinations about what you need and don't need. Only that can be done by the title company or an attorney who reviews those documents, or you yourself as the individual who pays for it. And there are a few states, North Dakota is one, Oregon is another one, where they license that person who goes and pulls those records, and they are very strict about what they can and cannot give you back as information.
We actually had a title report in Alabama where our abstractor had to go through the county books that were decades old and try and find the information on the parcel number. So it may take a couple of days, but it's when you have to go and schedule a second appointment to go back and dig through other books of record that, it does pay to get that in-depth information.
Got it. Thank you for that explanation. So a title abstract is a title search, but requiring much more detail is what I'm understanding.
Yeah, it's basically going to be something that hasn't been digested and broken down. It's everything. And a typical title search, like I said, would be just the minimal information that you need, everything that the title company believes to be pertinent. The abstract would be things that have lost relevance 20, 30, 40 years ago, but you're still going to get a copy of that and that information. It's just a different thought process. And really the only abstract state that I'm aware of is Oklahoma.
Okay, we'll keep that in mind if I want 60 years worth of information on a property. So a title search is like the Carfax, but for a property. Is that a correct analogy?
That is a very good analogy. As we said earlier, we're going to take a look at those 4 key points: the ownership, the taxes, the voluntary and involuntary liens. From an ownership standpoint, the biggest hiccup that a lot of people don't see, they'll see a deed and they'll have person A deeded to person B, and they'll go, okay, well, person B now owns the property, the grantee on the deed. But the title company, we're going to go back and we're going to look a few deeds back. And sometimes what we'll find is perhaps one of the parties, or the party that deeded, that party A, they inherited the property, and maybe they got it in through the court system, or maybe they didn't go through the court system and they just said, well, mom died, it's mine now. And those kind of things can really trip up a title search. And that and taxes not being paid is another thing that really can cause you to lose your entire investment. Illinois, Cook County, Illinois is a great example of a state, or a county rather, the Chicago area, greater Chicago area, where you can call the county records and they will tell you that the taxes are paid, but what they won't let you know is that they were paid by a third party. That's how that county manages their tax system. So rather than saying, hey, the owner has delinquent taxes, what happens is somebody else will step forward, pay those taxes, and then they have a lien on the property. After a certain period, usually about 3 years, they have the right to foreclose on that lien and take that property as their own. So it's something that if you weren't uniquely aware of what's going on in that particular jurisdiction, you'd lose the property outright and really not have any recourse other than getting in a bidding war with that person who is trying to take the property over when you thought you already paid for it and own it yourself.
Wow. A little scary.
Yeah, very much so. So it sounds like a title search, and title is hugely important, to your point you said earlier, to kind of any investor that wants to keep their investor, at least make sure that what they're about to purchase is going to stay theirs. That being said, when should an investor work with a title company? Is this something, before they make an offer, after? What's the usual timeline that investors work with Accurate Group?
Yep. So I'll have note investors where either they're looking at a single asset or a pool where they're just starting their due diligence, right? So maybe they've looked through it. They've said, you know what, some of these are garbage. No, we're going to remove those from the pool. It's kind of around that same time when you're ordering your BPO, right? So really, I'm going to start fine tuning what my bid is going to be on these assets. So then, okay, I know that I'm going to actually have an interest in all of them. I'm going to be in first position, or if you're buying a junior, I know what my position is going to be. And then I know what the value of the property is going to be if I have to take it back over. So, it's one of those where I would want to say that you would do it before you did your purchase, but right in that due diligence portion.
All right, great. So you mentioned BPO, and I'm not sure everybody's familiar with that term. Can you guys talk about what BPOs are?
Sure, I can talk about that. So they're broker price opinions. So you have real estate agents, brokers that are going out into the field in their local market, and they're giving you the fair value of that property given a exterior inspection or also an interior inspection. So they're going to take 3 sales and 3 comps, and they're going to look at square footage, bathrooms, upgrades, anything that they would say, hey, this is going to impact the value of the property. And they'll give you that fair market assessment.
Okay, great. And why are those important?
Yeah. So those are important just because you always want to know what the value is of the collateral if you have to take it REO. So what is the actual property worth, right? At the end of the day, if I have to take it back. So they can basically say, okay, you know what, this property, there may be a $15,000 note on it, but you know what, the property is only worth 25. If you're going to have to go and have a non-performer, go through the legal foreclosure process, it may not be worth it at the end of the day. What's nice about BPOs is they're going to actually go to the property and they're going to take photos so they can see, hey, does it look like it's occupied? You know, do I have somebody who has completely destroyed everything and ran? We have situations where investors go, they get a BPO, and it turns out there was a fire at the property. So you may have what looks like on Google Maps a physical standing structure, but in the back, it's completely torched. So, I mean, we've even had it where properties did not even exist. It was just a concrete slab. So it's just another toolkit in your arsenal to kind of say, hey, I know I need to do the back work. I know I need to see really what I'm getting into with these. How do I go making sure I'm getting the best information and making the most logical decision? So yeah, BPOs, very, very good. And what's nice too is you can also always reach out to the agent as well. So our BPOs will have the name and also the agency of the individual performing the BPO. So what's nice is if you do have to take that asset all the way through disposition, you kind of have somebody who's local who can help you get that set up for you. So it's, yeah, I think BPOs are a great due diligence tool.
Oh, 100%. That is, you got to make sure you understand what you're getting as far as the value of the property, especially from a note investing perspective. Single family as well. You want to know what the price of the property would be. One thing we haven't really talked about is title insurance. And I think that gets tossed around a lot from the investing space. But even if you're buying a home, like a primary residence, I hear that as part of the process too. Can you help us understand how title insurance works and why it's important?
All right, yeah, I can jump in on that. So we talked earlier about a title search, and that's basically us giving you a piece of paper that says, this is what we believe is going on with the property, who owns it, any liens or encumbrances on it. The title insurance is actually a one-time expense. You pay it at closing. It's a rate-based promulgated by the state. So it's going to vary from state to state. A state like Florida, you would pay like $6.50 for every $1,000 of the coverage. State like North Carolina, you're going to spend $2.25 for every 1,000. So you can see that there's a pretty big swing in differences, but it's a one-time expense. You pay it one time at the closing, and then your coverage lasts as long as you own that property. And in essence, what it's saying is anything that should have been discovered by a title search that wasn't, that was missed, even if there are things that were done fraudulently or incorrectly in the records that we couldn't find, we would come back and say, okay, we'll cover that loss for you. And depending on the amount of damage, that might mean we pay you, a few $1,000s for those missed taxes, or if you lose the property, the entire value of the policy. And so that title insurance, it's very critical. If you're going to buy, as a home buyer, if you're going to buy a house and you're going to have a loan on it, a first position lien, the title, the lender is going to insist that there is insurance, that they're covered for it. And in virtually every state, there are a handful that don't, but in virtually every state, for another $25, you can have that owner's policy along with it. So you're covered along with the lender. And that's going to cover anything that happened. My own personal purchase for my first house, having been in the industry since the mid 80s, bought a house and the taxes were missed. And 3 years later, after moving into my house, I got a notice that my house was going up for foreclosure sale for unpaid taxes. And as someone who's in the industry and knows, I said, okay, I'll just call the title insurance company. They'll take care of it right away. But if I didn't know that and I got a notice in the mail, I mean, you couldn't sleep until you got it figured out. And even then you might not realize that, hey, I need to call my title insurance company with my policy and say, there's a problem. This happened prior to me owning the property. You need to fix it. And they will, and they'll take care of it right away, because paying the few $1,000s in missed taxes is a lot cheaper than having to give you the full amount for the policy because the house was taken from you. So, but yeah, basically it's insurance. It's not a hazard insurance. It's a one-time payment, but it's gonna cover you. And like I said, that $100,000 home in North Carolina, you're talking about $225 to not have to worry about anything that happened up until the time you bought the property. So that long lost nephew that said, hey, I should have had a share of grandpa's estate isn't going to come up, and it's not going to cost you anything, or the misjudgment or whatever. So
now, Rick, can you explain that as an investor, if I'm purchasing a note, do I have the ability to buy a title policy on that, even though I'm not the actual borrower?
No, yes, you do. Absolutely, you do. I meant no, in that you're not the borrower. Correct. You're just the person holding the note. But that policy is your insurance that anything that happened to that property prior to you acquiring that note, you're going to be both aware of, but also covered. So if there is some sort of loss, you're going to get a financial compensation for that full value of that loss. As an owner, I can at any time go to a title company and get a new policy on my property. Now, it would seem silly to do that because I should have gotten one when I purchased it firsthand, but sometimes people don't. When they have a cash transaction at a later time, they say, well, maybe I should have done that. They can go back and get an owner's policy at that time, and it will cover them just the same. And they'll know about anything that they may have missed that they weren't aware of at the time that happened as well. So, like missed taxes, when they do the search, they'll find those things.
Yeah, sounds like insurance is a good idea, especially for those of us who are risk averse and want to sleep well at night.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree.
We've talked a little bit about title searches. We've talked about insurance. Are there other types of services a title company provides?
Sure. Staci, you want to take that, or you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, so as a full service title company, we can also do full settlements and closings as well. So it doesn't really matter where in the United States you are. We have actually thousands of mobile notaries within our network that can meet you all the way up in Alaska if you wish. And we can make sure that those documents are prepared, QC'd, and recorded correctly as well. So I know Rich will tell you some horror stories that things aren't recorded in certain counties, or things get behind, or something wasn't done correctly, and then that causes a big mess. So what's nice as a nationwide title provider is you're always going to be dealing with somebody who has expertise. So if you're issuing full title commitments and policy, there are QCs and checks that have to go into place in order to be able to warrant and issue that policy. And those are checks that are being done across the board for all of our title work. For us, I can't talk to other title companies, but we also offer valuations. So the BPOs that we mentioned earlier, those full service nationwide as well. Additionally, full appraisals. So in some instances where you want a little bit better of an accurate value, maybe you are looking to, provide a loan on that product or property, you can get a full appraisal there. Also, we have some guys who say, you know what, I just want to do a automated valuation model. They're a lot less expensive than a BPO. They're calculated based on just numerical values, and those can give you a quick idea of what a property is in about 5 minutes. So what's nice from a larger provider like us is you've got your entire title and valuation cascades available to you. And then also, like I mentioned, the closings as well.
A one-stop shop for all your title needs. I love it.
Hey, I have a note investor that he was ready to forgive on a non-performing note. He was ready to forgive about $7,000 that all the lady had to do was print out a piece of paper and sign it and give it back to him. That's all she had to do. She went MIA for an entire month, and it caused all sorts of servicing problems, everything else, that we ended up doing the notarization for $100 for him, and problem solved. But so it's nice to be able to have services that kind of are everywhere in the event that something is needed. So
love it. And that was a great segue into horror stories. We've mentioned it, but we'd love to hear not to get excited about horror stories, because I'm not excited about other people's failures, but it's just exciting to learn from some of the craziest mistakes or horror stories that you guys have heard from. And we'd love if you would share a couple of those.
Well, I've got one real quick. Rick probably has 1,000 of them, but with my
you can see the gears already turning on Rick's head.
My investors, I get a lot of phone calls and things like that. I had one gentleman where in our title reports, we always check for foreclosures and bankruptcies, right? So you're like, oh, okay, yeah, kind of nice to have. Well, if you're doing your own servicing and you're going to like a Madison, those costs to service that loan, if somebody is in bankruptcy, is like 3 times the amount per month. So, my guy was trying to reach out to his borrower. Number one, you can't do that to somebody who is going through bankruptcy. So just kind of having those instances in place, like, oh, I wish I would have known earlier. Yeah, I get a lot of those types of stories of missed items on previous title reports from other vendors.
Yeah, one that really stands out for me that, well, there are a couple that really stand out, but one, it had to do in Pennsylvania. And what had happened was a widow, when her husband passed, he had an insurance policy, which basically paid off their note, their mortgage on their house. So then, because he wanted to make sure that she was taken care of for the rest of her life. Well, their mortgage had an escrow component to it, meaning that their taxes and their insurance were paid by the bank. Well, once the bank was paid in full, their fiduciary responsibility for paying the taxes went away. So when the tax notice was sent to the bank, they basically ignored it because they didn't have any responsibility at that point. At some point, the widow realized that she needed to pay taxes. Wait a minute, I should be paying taxes, and found out what the amount was and mailed a check to the county. Well, the check arrived the day after the taxes were due, so they were marked delinquent. As marked delinquent, they applied the amount she paid, but there was about a $6, I think $6.70 that she had missed. That wasn't the interest for that one day of that delinquency. Well, the county reached out to the person, the payor that they had on file, which was the bank, and sent them a notice saying, hey, there are delinquent taxes. Well, this went on for 3 years until the property was sold in foreclosure for those $6.70 in delinquent taxes, and she lost her house. And the bidder on, and Pennsylvania is kind of egregious this way. Pennsylvania is a beautiful state, but rather than having someone pay the taxes, they auction off those taxes, that property, for the taxes that are owed. And rather than saying, okay, we'll collect $6.70, they'll try to collect as much as they can. And in this particular case, they collected $87,000 from the investor who wanted the property. And he offered to sell her her house back for $87,000. And that was, I mean, she thought she was taking care of her husband, who passed it, thought she had taken care of her, but it ended up just being an absolute nightmare. And it went to court multiple times. And it's easy to side with the widow because, I mean, she's losing her house, but at the same time, there's an investor who invested $87,000 to get that property and acquire it. And he doesn't know the backstory, or she. And in this particular case, are they to just give up the $87,000 that they invested because it's the right thing to do? And the county certainly wasn't going to step forward and pay that money back. That wasn't going to happen. So it was an absolute nightmare. And I don't even know how it ever got resolved because it kept going suit, countersuit, countersuit. And at some point you just have to walk away because it's too depressing to look at.
That is crazy. I feel sorry for those people involved.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. All right. So let's move on to something a little more positive and fun to talk about, which for me and Kevin can be tech. We wouldn't be the tech guys who invest if we didn't ask you a tech question. So
I actually started off in IT and user experience and was told that I talk too much. And that's how I ended up in sales.
Yeah, that's awesome. You were in UX. So how do you guys see tech shaping the future of your industry? I know there are some very, very interesting things going on in the tech world that could potentially shape your industry. And I was just wondering if you guys have thought about that at all and what thoughts you may have on that topic.
So I think that relates specifically to valuations and then to title separately, right? So from a valuation perspective, I talked about that automated valuation model. So you're pulling data from Fannie, Freddie, every single system. If you go on the Zillow today, right, they'll give you an instant value of property, right? With our appraisal network of, guys being 55 over plus and that pool just dwindling every single year, I think you're going to see more and more rely on tech in the valuation space because the demand is so high, turn times are crazy, and you don't have anyone to actually do those valuation work. So definitely increase there. Also with the title aspect of it, what Rick was saying, having everything being available online. You no longer need the abstractor. With COVID, everyone realized that the next frontier for mortgage is online. So I'll let him continue that discussion for title, but the things that we saw, turn times, headaches, all of that now, I think is all going to be depleted based on the overemphasis of relying on technology.
Yeah, I think I would add to that one of the things that we noticed in a lot of states, COVID related, was that they opened up the door for a digital signing of documents. So in a format that we're in right now, where everyone sits around a computer, their own computer, you can see their face, and we're allowed to do like a notarization of a mortgage, and click here, click here, click here, and you're assigning, your name, your digital signature to that document. And there are more and more counties that allowed recordings to be done digitally as well. So rather than having to, my first job in the industry back in 1986 was getting on a motorcycle with documents to record, running to the courthouse, running up some stairs and handing them to a person who would take them and put a stamp on them that said I delivered them at 3:01 in the afternoon and assign a number to it. Today, you have the ability to take that digital document, go to sort of a warehousing group that captures these for many different counties, put it in there, and then that's it. There's no person delivering it. There's no overnight expense with the FedEx or UPS. That part of it, and now adding in the ability to have digital signatures, is going to be really, I think, where the future is. I think about my children who are now college age, but they're at that cusp where they stopped teaching them cursive. So as a parent, I had to teach them how to sign their name. That was not something that the school gave them. And now that they're earning paychecks and doing those things and having to sign the back of a check, I think in the future, we will see less and less real, what we call a wet signature on documents, where it's just going to be your digital imprint is going to be put on it, and that's it.
Well, let's talk about the disaster aspect of it, though. I mean, look at First American. So the cybersecurity, right? And blockchain. So what was it? Maybe a couple of years ago, we had First American that if you had your URL for your closing documents, if you changed one number in the URL, you saw somebody else's closing documents. Mm-hmm. And it was just a simple mistake. Somebody messed up along the way, but you're having your PII just completely exposed, right? So what's to say that if I have something digitally recorded that has my signature on it, that somebody can't go in there and do a little, encryption and change around the information? So, I think there's that need to really have that dependency on technology. But at the end of the day, it's like, where can it also be compromised on that wet signature, kind of methodology that we've had forever? That don't they still, if you have your deed, they get stored kind of in a basement in New York City somewhere,
So in most places, actually, your deed would get returned to you personally and for you to keep in your safe or whatever you would want. But along those same lines, I don't think that it certainly doesn't get enough coverage, but we being in the industry, there's roughly about 4,000 counties in the United States. Some of them are little township districts in like Rhode Island or whatever, but basically counties, you can count somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000. I want to say that at any given time, half a dozen of them are dealing with ransomware, where they are locked down and can't do anything until they pay their ransom or, basically give up their records and restore them from their last viable save. So it happens a lot more than I think anyone is aware of. We were all, keenly aware, particularly here in the Carolinas with the Colonial Pipeline disaster and what it did to our gas and not having availability of gas for a week, really what that meant to everyone. But the same thing's going on at courthouses all across the country. And, as a business, we really take security seriously. And I would almost say too seriously or over the top. But when you see instances of what's happening in the public sector, those county courthouses, you can't emphasize it enough, because it just takes one person clicking on the wrong attachment and then the whole thing is done.
Well, okay, so you two guys are in IT, so somebody's got some cryptocurrency over there. Would you ever do a deal in Bitcoin or anything like that? As far as technology goes from a purchasing perspective, what are your thoughts on that within the investment industry?
I would do a deal in Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I don't know much about it, but I feel that it wouldn't. Yeah, sure, why not? I wouldn't be opposed to it.
But I want to hang on to my Bitcoin right now, so not right now. I'll get rid of those dollars that lose value every day. That's another episode.
Yep, I love it. So thank you so much for both of you for your time today. I love this conversation. The horror stories were educating, but they were actually horrific. And I love that we got to talking about cryptocurrency as a tangential topic. But if people want to leverage your services at Accurate Group, where can they find you?
Sure. So going to obviously accurategroup.com. My name is Staci Hannebrink. I can provide Kevin with my contact information. We're here for anything that you need. What I like to say too is, you know what, if you're getting a title report and you have questions on it, it's not going to make sense to you, right? We have our actual team underneath Rick that they'll write out assignments, they'll put in notes why things are looking weird, maybe there's some gaps. Don't hesitate to ask questions, regardless of who you're getting your title or valuations from. Always question. So
Awesome. Thanks, guys. We really enjoyed having you on. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
all right,
Very
thanks.
welcome.